I will not stop. Let that resonate in your heart for a moment. Whatever you are facing, whatever challenge stands before you, you need to make a decision today. A decision not based on your feelings, not based on what others say, but based on the unshakable truth that with God all things are possible. In this life, we will encounter difficulties. There will be times when we feel like giving up. The road will seem long and the obstacles insurmountable. But I want you to know this. There is a power, a strength that lies within you that is greater than any challenge you will ever face. It's not your own strength, it's not your own wisdom, but the strength and wisdom of God that is available to you if you trust Him. The world tells us to quit when it gets hard, to take the easy path when the road is too rough, to throw in the towel when things don't go according to plan. But God says something different. He says, you are more than a conqueror through Christ who strengthens you. He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. These aren't just words, these are promises. These are the promises of the living God. And it is these promises that we cling to in the darkest of times. If you're in the middle of a storm right now, if life seems uncertain and your future unclear, let me remind you of something. God is with you. He is not distant. He is not unaware of your struggles. In fact, He is right there beside you, holding you up, giving you the strength to stand when you feel like falling. He is faithful to fulfill the work He has started in you. The truth is, you and I, we have a choice. When the weight of the world is pressing in on us, we can either give up or press forward. And if we decide to press forward, we do so not in our own power, but in the power of the Holy Spirit. When we face opposition, we don't have to shrink back in fear or discouragement. Instead, we rise up in faith. We rise up because we know that we are not fighting this battle alone. You may not see it now, but every challenge, every setback, every difficulty is a stepping stone to something greater. The trials you face today are shaping you, refining you, building you up to be the person God has called you to be. God does not waste anything. Not a moment, not a hardship, not a tear. Every moment is part of His plan, part of His process of bringing you into the fullness of your purpose. I know there are times when the weight of your circumstances can make you feel as though you're standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into an abyss. But I want to remind you that God has not brought you this far to leave you now. He has a plan, and His plan is good. When you trust in Him, when you choose to hold on, He will be faithful to lead you through. Think about the heroes of faith we read about in Scripture. Men and women who faced insurmountable odds, who stood firm in their faith when everything around them seemed to be falling apart. Abraham, who was promised a child when he was well beyond the age of having one, chose not to doubt God's promises. Joseph, who was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery and thrown into prison, never gave up on God's purpose for his life. Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt, didn't stop even when the path ahead was filled with obstacles and the people around him were filled with doubt. They didn't stop because they knew something that we must know. The battle is not ours to fight alone. God fights for us. God fights with us. And when we stand firm in His promises, He will bring victory in His time and in His way. So today I want to encourage you, don't quit. Don't stop. You may feel weary. You may feel weak. But in those moments of weakness, God's strength will rise up within you. The Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 12:9 that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. You don't have to be strong on your own. You don't have to rely on your own abilities. When you are weak, He is strong. When you are tired, He will give you rest. When you feel overwhelmed, He will give you peace that passes all understanding. You see, the enemy wants to wear you down. He wants to discourage you. He wants you to believe that you will never make it, that you are not good enough, that the dream in your heart will never come to pass. But don't listen to his lies. Don't give in to the temptation to quit. The moment you feel like giving up is often the moment right before breakthrough. The enemy knows this, and that's why he tries to get you to stop before you experience the victory that's coming. But God says, keep going, keep moving forward. The best is yet to come. Remember, every great victory in Scripture came through perseverance. The walls of Jericho fell after the Israelites marched around them for 7 days. The disciples didn't see the resurrection until they had seen the crucifixion. Jesus didn't rise from the dead without first enduring the cross. Every story of triumph, every story of victory is a story of perseverance. And you are no different. You are a part of God's great story. He has a plan for you. He has a purpose for you. He will finish the work He started in you. So in those moments when you feel like quitting, I want you to remember this. God has not called you to failure. He has called you to victory. He has called you to keep going, to press on, to not stop. You may not see it now, but I promise you, every step you take in faith is leading you closer to the fulfillment of God's promises. Every prayer you pray, every act of obedience, every time you choose to keep going, even when it's hard, is bringing you one step closer to the breakthrough you've been waiting for. And when that breakthrough comes, when you look back and see all that God has done, you'll be able to say with confidence, I didn't stop. I kept going. And God was faithful. So my friend, I challenge you today, don't stop. No matter what you're facing, no matter how difficult the road may seem, keep moving forward. God is with you. He is for you, and He will bring you through to victory. You may be facing a setback today, but that setback is not the end. It's simply a setup for something greater. God is using this time, this struggle, to prepare you for what's ahead. And when you press on, when you don't stop, you will see the glory of God revealed in your life in ways you never imagined. So I say to you once again, I will not stop. And I encourage you to say the same. You will not stop. You will keep going. You will keep pressing on, knowing that the God who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. And in the end, you will see that it was all worth it. Don't stop. Keep moving forward. The victory is closer than you think. No matter how difficult life may seem, we must make the choice to press forward with faith and trust that God will provide the strength and guidance needed to overcome every obstacle. Our strength does not come from ourselves, but from God. In times of weakness, God's power is made perfect, and He will equip us to keep going even when we feel like giving up. Every trial we face is an opportunity for growth and a step toward fulfilling God's purpose for our lives. By persevering in faith and obedience, we move closer to experiencing God's promises. The challenges we face today are preparing us for a greater victory ahead. When we refuse to stop, we will see God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of His promises in our lives. In life, we will all face challenges. Some of them may seem insurmountable. At times, the weight of our circumstances can feel overwhelming, and it's easy to become discouraged. Yet, it is in those moments of difficulty where the most profound lessons are learned, and our strength, resilience, and faith are built. When we face challenges, we are presented with a choice: to surrender to the circumstances or to persevere and press forward. Perseverance is not just about simply enduring. It is about enduring with purpose and faith. It's about standing firm in the face of adversity, believing that there is something greater on the other side of this struggle. As we go through life, we will all experience seasons of hardship. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, the weight of illness, financial struggles, broken relationships, or the frustration of unfulfilled dreams. But no matter the form of the challenge, the response required is always the same: to persevere. Perseverance is a character trait that is cultivated over time, often through difficult experiences. It is not something that we are born with, but rather something that is developed through the trials we face. The Apostle James writes in his letter, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." James 1:2-4. What an incredible perspective. James is not encouraging us to ignore the pain of trials, but to recognize that those trials are producing something in us, something that is invaluable. The perseverance that grows in the midst of our struggles will lead to maturity and completeness. It will shape us into the person God has called us to be. When you are facing a challenge, it can feel as though everything is falling apart, that the weight of the world is on your shoulders. But what you may not realize is that these moments of difficulty are actually opportunities for growth. In those moments when everything seems uncertain, God is at work behind the scenes, developing your character and building your faith. When things are going well, it's easy to rely on our own abilities, to trust in our own strength. But when things get tough, we are forced to lean into God, to trust in His provision, His wisdom, and His timing. There is a powerful truth that we must hold on to. God is with us in every season, especially in the tough ones. We are not walking through our struggles alone. The psalmist writes, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." This verse speaks to the heart of perseverance. It doesn't say that we won't experience valleys. It acknowledges that we will, but it also assures us that God is with us in those valleys. We do not have to fear the darkness, because God's presence brings light and hope into our lives. As you navigate through challenges, you may feel like you're walking through a valley with no way out. You may not be able to see the end of the tunnel when we think about perseverance. We cannot ignore the fundamental role that God's faithfulness and strength play in our journey. The challenges we face in life are not meant to be faced in our own power. In fact, if we try to navigate life relying only on our own abilities, we will inevitably falter. But the good news is that we do not have to rely on ourselves. We have a faithful and all-powerful God who promises to give us the strength we need for every trial. God's faithfulness is one of His most reassuring qualities. It is the foundation of our trust in Him. When we feel weak, uncertain, or afraid, we can be confident that God will never leave us nor forsake us. His faithfulness is not dependent on our circumstances or on our actions, but on His nature and His promises. He is faithful because He is God, and His word never returns void. He will always do what he says he will do. Throughout Scripture, we see examples of God's faithfulness. His promises are sprinkled all throughout the pages of the Bible, reminding us that he will always be there for us. In Psalm 36:5, it says, "Your love, O Lord, reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies." In Thessalonians 5:24, Paul writes, "The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it." These verses remind us that God's faithfulness is limitless. It stretches as far as the heavens themselves and reaches every corner of our lives. In times of difficulty, when we are walking through the fire, it's easy to question God's faithfulness. We might wonder why we are facing such hardships or why things aren't going the way we planned. It can feel like we are alone, abandoned in the midst of our struggles. But this is where the strength of God's faithfulness comes into play. God is not absent in our pain, he is present in it. His faithfulness means that even when we can't see him, he is still working in our lives. In Isaiah 55, verse 8 through 9, God reminds us that his ways are not our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts. We may not always understand why we go through certain trials, but we can trust that he has a purpose in it all. Just as a master craftsman uses every tool in their toolbox to create something beautiful, God uses every moment, every hardship, and every trial to mold us into the person he wants us to be. His faithfulness ensures that even in our darkest moments, he is at work in ways we might not immediately understand. He sees the bigger picture, and his faithfulness to us is unwavering, even when we can't comprehend his plan. God's strength is also an essential element in our ability to persevere. Our own strength is limited. We get tired, we get worn out, and eventually we run out of energy. But God's strength is limitless. The Bible tells us that his strength is made perfect in our weakness. In 1 Corinthians 12:1, Paul shares how God responded to his plea for help with his Gibeus Boshe. And we talk about perseverance. It's essential to understand that obedience and faith are integral parts of the journey. They are not just abstract concepts or theoretical ideals. They are the foundational elements that fuel our persistence through life's challenges. The combination of obedience to God's will and steadfast faith in his promises creates a powerful force that sustains us in our struggles and carries us toward victory. Obedience is often misunderstood. People sometimes think of it as a restrictive or a burdensome thing, something that limits their freedom or holds them back. But in reality, obedience to God is liberating. It is the pathway to true freedom. When we obey God, we align ourselves with his perfect will, and in doing so, we unlock the blessings and promises he has in store for us. Obedience is not just about following rules or doing what we're told. It is about trusting God's wisdom more than our own. God knows what is best for us, and his commands are given not to restrict us, but to protect us and guide us toward the fullness of life he desires for us. In John 14:15, Jesus says, "If you love me, keep my commands." Obedience is a response to God's love, a way of showing that we trust him. Victory through endurance is one of the most profound truths we can embrace in our walk with God. It's easy to focus on the end goal, the moment of victory, and imagine that everything will be perfect once we reach it. But true victory, the kind that lasts, comes through endurance, the ability to press on, to continue moving forward, even when the path is long and difficult. Endurance is not simply the act of surviving or enduring through hardships. It is about growing, learning, and becoming stronger with each challenge we face. It is through the process of enduring the trials, the pain, and the struggles that we are transformed into the people God has called us to be. God uses the trials in our lives as tools to shape our character, refine our faith, and mold us into His image. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, speaks of the role of suffering and endurance in the life of a believer. He writes, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." Romans 5, 1 through 2. This passage reveals a powerful truth. Our suffering is not in vain. It is not something that should cause us to despair or lose hope. Instead, our suffering produces perseverance, which in turn develops character, and that character ultimately leads us to hope. Endurance allows us to face the hardships of life with a different perspective. Instead of seeing them as obstacles that are trying to stop us, we begin to see them as opportunities for growth. God does not promise us a life free from difficulties. In fact, He promises us that we will face trials, but He also promises that we will never face them alone. His strength will carry us through, and His grace will sustain us. One of the most inspiring aspects of endurance is that it is not always about the immediate circumstances we find ourselves in, but about the larger picture. It's about the spiritual transformation that occurs when we choose to press on. Victory does not always come in the form of external circumstances changing instantly. Instead, it often comes in the form of inner growth. As we learn to trust God more deeply and depend on Him more fully. True victory is when our hearts are transformed and we become more like Christ in the midst of adversity. Jesus Himself is the ultimate example of victory through endurance. He endured the greatest of trials, the suffering and death on the cross. But He did not do so in vain. His endurance brought about the greatest victory of all, the redemption of humanity. He endured the cross, scorning its shame for the joy set before Him, the joy of seeing people restored to relationship with God. Hebrews 12:2 encourages us to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before Him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus didn't just endure for the sake of enduring. He endured with a purpose. His endurance was fueled by a deep love for us and a commitment to God's plan of redemption. When we face trials, we are called to endure with the same mindset, knowing that there is a greater purpose at work and that God is using the difficulties we face to fulfill His purposes in our lives. Victory through endurance is also about recognizing that the struggle itself is part of the process. Many times we want to bypass the hard parts and get straight to the victory, but without the endurance, we would not be prepared for the victory. Endurance builds in us the strength to handle what God has in store for us. It strengthens our faith, refines our character, and deepens our trust in Him. James 1:12 reminds us of this truth. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. The victory that God promises us is not just an earthly victory, it is a heavenly reward. Endurance we demonstrate here on earth will be rewarded in eternity. It is through our trials and our perseverance that we are prepared for the eternal crown of life that awaits us. Endurance also teaches us patience. It's easy to want things to happen quickly, to rush through the difficulties and get to the good part, but God uses endurance to teach us to wait on His timing. Psalm 27:14 encourages us to wait on His timing. Psalm 27:14 encourages us to wait on His timing. Psalm 27:14 encourages us to wait on His timing. Waiting is often the hardest part of the endurance process. It requires us to trust that God is in control and that He will bring about His plan at the right time. Patience in the midst of trial shows that we trust God's sovereignty and believe that He is working, even when we can't see it. Through endurance, we also become a witness to others. Our ability to endure in faith becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness. While others see us press on through hardships with hope, joy, and peace, it speaks volumes about the power of God at work in our lives. Our endurance serves as a reminder that God is with us and that He is faithful to fulfill His promises. We may never know how our perseverance will impact those around us, but we can trust that God will use our endurance to encourage and strengthen others in their own walks of faith. Victory through endurance is also a process of overcoming the obstacles that stand in our way. Life will always present challenges, some that are unexpected and others that seem overwhelming. But each challenge is an opportunity to grow stronger. Every time we face a trial and choose to persevere, we are building spiritual muscle. Just as physical training requires pushing through pain and exhaustion to build strength, so too does spiritual endurance require us to press on through hardship in order to grow stronger in our faith. Endurance also enables us to experience the fullness of God's grace. It is through our trials that we come to know God in deeper, more intimate ways. When things are easy, we may take God's presence for granted. But when we face hardship, we are drawing closer to Him. His grace becomes more evident, and we come to understand the depth of His love and the sufficiency of His strength. 2 Corinthians 12:9 reminds us that, "But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Victory through endurance is a testament to God's power working in us. It is not through our own strength that we endure, but through His. The Apostle Paul writes in Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." This verse encapsulates the essence of victory through endurance. We are not called to endure in our own power. We are called to endure through the strength that Christ provides. Every step of endurance that we take, every moment we choose to press on instead of giving up, brings us closer to the victory that God has for us. And that victory, though it may come in many different forms, spiritual growth, deeper faith, a closer relationship with God, is always worth the endurance. Victory is not just about reaching the finish line. It is about the transformation that happens along the way. It is about becoming more like Christ, about deepening our trust in God, and about becoming witnesses of His faithfulness. Endurance isn't just about getting through the trial. It's about letting the trial refine us and mold us into the image of Christ. The more we endure, the more we experience His grace and strength. The more we endure, the more we learn to trust in His promises and hold on to hope, knowing that He who began a good work in us will be faithful to complete it. Victory through endurance is not just the reward we receive at the end of the struggle. It is the growth, the strength, and the transformation that happen along the way. It is the assurance that God is with us in every step of the journey, and that His faithfulness will see us through to the end.